Put your money where your butt is, which is incidentally is your face.
This time, we're looking at Season 6, Episode 12, The Starfighters.
A film about intimacy among planes and distance among fathers and sons.
But first, we have some follow-up. Adam, I believe you had some points you wanted to make?
Yes, well, just in follow-up, not to our last episode, but our episode just before on The Deadly Mantis, 804. Remember we were talking about the causes that would lead to a boom in both giant monster movies and nature run-amok movies, and you and I were both floating theories on that.
Yes.
Well, there is a terrific episode of the Fiasco Brothers Watch a Movie that is about a great little film called Matinee, despite the fact that it was, I believe, co-written and certainly directed by MST3K nemesis Joe Dante. Boo, hiss. But in that episode of the podcast of the Fiasco Brothers Watch a Movie, they go into great detail about a theme in the film, which is that people are desperate to take their minds off real panic. And I guess to get into the movie a little bit, Matinee is set in the 1950s during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
So there is a William Castle figure, William Castle being a great exploitation movie director of such hits as The Tingler, in which Vincent Price finds a little thing, a little wormy thing that exists in everyone's body, and the only way to make sure it doesn't kill you is to scream real loud, encouraging everyone in the theater to scream real loud. Such a gimmicky huckster arrives in the small town the film is set in. Everyone is sweating bullets over potential bombings and are going through duck and cover drills. But the kids, unlike all the adults, the kids are hip to the idea that, you know, if a bomb drops, being under a desk won't help you. And it's the William Castle figure, played by John Goodman in the film, who points out that it's like no one knows what they're doing when they're an adult, and being an authority just means that you're old. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're wise. And that people are dying to escape any potential harm or real danger in the world, which is why movies about giant creatures exist. It's a really great discussion of a really fun movie. There'll be a link in the show notes.
Well, on that note, Adam, do you want to tell us about the plot of The Starfighters, such as it is?
All right. Well, let me grab my vocoder and let's take the film summary into a strange new place.
Good evening, Starfighters. This is your captain. You are about to watch hours of jets refueling. Yes, it does look like the planes are having sex in the air. Your captain says, put your mind out of the gutter. Enter Copernicus. Wasn't he Polish? Your captain overhears a conversation. Hi, Dad. I'm joining the Air Force. Hi, joining the Air Force. I'm Dad. Also, no son of mine pilots a starfighter. And I say, uh-oh, that's gotta be some dad. Stand by. Your captain says, put your head in your hands. Captain says, put your hands on your hips. Make amends with your dad. This is your captain. We are going up. We are all going up for refueling. Together. Stand by. This is your captain again. I've got a funny feeling I've seen this all before. Why? Because it's a refueling scene. Why? Because any scene that doesn't involve officers going on dates, poopy suits, or dads is a refueling scene. Why? It's so cheap. Stand by. This is your captain. You must be moved to a different unit for taking a starfighter out on a personal cruise. The rest of us will enjoy our poopy suits. Put your hands over your eyes. Jump out of the theater. There is no plot. This is the film, and this is the summary of the film. This is the film, and this is the summary of the film.
And now to the Satellite of Love. In the intro, Crow proudly announces his plans to log on to that information superhighway the kids have been talking about so much, but it doesn't work. After the break, in what is no doubt a sketch penned by Frank Conniff, Crow goes slowly insane while waiting on hold for tech support. In Deep 13, Frank and Dr. Forrester try to show off their cranial ports, but they're quickly bowled over, get it, by the SOL's hard sell for Cowboy Mike's Ricochet barbecue sauce. In segment 2, Crow decides to take a break from waiting on tech support by reenacting the refueling scene from the movie, on Tom. In segment 3, Crow and Tom, in full military regalia, call on Mike to be debriefed, and then they take off his briefs. Next, in what might be the most Kevin Murphyest of segments ever produced, the United Servo Academy men's chorus serenades the audience with a sober rendition of Fifth Dimension's Up, Up, and Away. In the final segment, Crow finally gets onto the information superhighway and joins in a game of boogers. What is boogers, anyway?
Yeah, well, I was about to ask you, what the hell is boogers?
Is that some sort of, altnet thing, or...?
Crow was in the dark web way before it got really dark. I have no idea what boogers is. At first I was thinking maybe it's code for, or like an off-brand name for something like worms, but then I remembered this is MST3K. They would always use the name brand.
Right.
So.
Any thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, Chris, you pick any boogers?
So, boogers is basically a variation on reverse psi. Or Othello. Oh, God, I'll just send you a link.
Okay, yay! Yeah, because the only thing I know about boogers is that Johnny Fever got kicked off the air for saying booger on the air in the first episode of WKRP.
Really?
Yes, or rather, that's the explanation as to why he's now working at WKRP instead of a bigger radio station. Whoa, attacks! Is this boogers?
Yeah, look down at Attacks Clones.
Oh, I see. Because I was about to say, Attacks is the coolest artwork I've ever seen. Basically, there's like a Buddha, a Medusa, a what appears to be Squidward from SpongeBob, and what might be the creature from the Black Lagoon are all just hanging out on like the coolest grid I ever did see. It's like they're playing Connect 4 wrong. Like they have the board on its side.
I just wonder how the early internet couldn't handle playing games, could it? They didn't have any morphigers in the early 90s.
Yes, true. You had to pretend the creature from the Black Lagoon or Medusa was a circle on some kind of weird honeycomb by the looks of it.
Yeah.
And that's what boogers was.
Yeah.
The early internet, in addition to porn, was entirely built on games.
Oh, games and porn.
There were muds and moos and all sorts of mostly text-based things, and these early very simple graphical board game type things, and et cetera.
However, it should be noted that the pornography scene in this time was equally simple. I can recall seeing my first pornographic image, which was just a triangle, and it said, "This is a butt."
Well, we did what is considered one of the more popular episodes of MST3K out there. And I have to ask, Adam, because I know you had not seen this movie before. Does it live up to the hype?
Well, I watched it, and it's funny. I didn't like this episode very much. Like, it's not
What?
bad, but it's not my favorite by any stretch. And in fact, I was thinking back on the 2 episodes from season 6 we looked at last year, Girls Town and Danger Death Ray. And I liked both of those episodes more than this one, and I couldn't really figure out, like, why then, like, what am I not seeing? Because I decided to watch this episode multiple times for that reason. I was really tasked with this. Which is funny because, like, you and I have given pans to a couple of classics. Like, we both disliked Future War and we both disliked It Conquered the World, which are seen as 2 highlights of the series. But I didn't feel compelled to rewatch either of those. But this one I kept coming back to because it's like, it's not that it's not funny, but I think I at least, figured out why it doesn't quite work for me. And it came up several times. It's funny in discussions about this episode is that it feels like a feature-long short. And sometimes the shorts, and this works for a short, brings out a certain, shall we say, lowbrow attitude from Micah Thoughts. And I found that that's kind of what it was for me. I found that the jokes were a little on the repetitive side. It's not a bad episode, but it's not one that's like in my top 40 or so. But I'm glad I finally saw it, and the music is great, which we'll talk about in a bit. But like, I found this episode hard going, and as such, the movie kept getting to me. The movie kept getting to me because this is an extremely boring movie.
Well, that's why I think I admire this episode so much. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm so familiar with this episode, so the beats feel very familiar and therefore welcome to me, I think. But I think this is one of the best examples of the magic of MST3K. Like, to take something that is completely arid and pointless as this movie. Like, there are worse movies, but this movie, like, there's just nothing. And they make so much with it. And what I admire the most is they never let an opportunity go. And even one of my favorites, like Zombie Nightmare, I'll have to admit that there are moments where the riffs kind of peter out because there's just nothing for them to work from. But I'm always just delighted about what they find to riff when there's so little there. I think, even though it's maybe a little lowbrow, all the sex jokes that they make during the refueling scene, like, there is literally nothing going on there for a good, like, 5 minutes. And they managed to not only make jokes, but build, like, grow the joke and make kind of an alternative plot going along with something that otherwise has no point. And that makes it such an enjoyable watch for me.
Well, there's a couple of things that I want to revisit in this episode, or at least bring up right now as we're doing our little debrief. I absolutely adore the boring of boringest episodes, where they tackle like the just incredibly bad movies. So that's why, I have an admiration for this episode, even though it's like, it's not one of my favorites, just because it's like, they did this movie, which is barely a movie. And although, like, I prefer, like, in Joel's tenure, I prefer, say, Monster a Go-Go, which is an incredibly boring film, or Manos, which is an equally incredibly boring film. And on Mike's tenure, like, some of my favorite Mike episodes are the Coleman Francis trilogy, of which you have 3 incredibly boring nothing movies.
Almost like incandescently boring.
Yeah. If you didn't know any better, you'd swear they were an art project for Nuit Blanche. But there are like some little moments here that I absolutely adore from this episode. There's, if nothing else, this for me was a good taste of everyone firing on all cylinders, because I don't know about you, and this is one of the reasons why I would say give it a try, because to newbies is one, my opinion is certainly in the minority for this episode, but also it's like, I think that it really shows how strong Mike, Trace, and Kevin became as a unit. And there's 2 moments that I think are really magical, and before I even get to those, I will say it's like, this is a good sketch episode in the Mike era. The sketches are pretty fun.
Yeah, great segments. Really sharp.
Yes, although I was totally grossed out by Crow going ass to mouth with Tom. That was disgusting.
Which is really funny because the Amazing Colossal Episode Guide swears that was unintentional. They didn't expect it to be dirty. It just ended up looking dirtier than they expected.
If it's not supposed to be as dirty as they were thinking, that sounds like cover-up, man, because there's that moment where Crow puts his beak inside Tom Servo, and Kevin goes, "Oh," and coughs a little bit. It's like true. That's exactly as filthy as like I don't know who wrote that, but they were out to lunch. But there's a few moments that I really love. One in particular is when this movie's score is a rockin'. Mike picks Tom up and they start slow dancing in the theater.
Yeah, that's very cute.
Yeah, that's so sweet. And the next thing was just like the random comments about the things they hoped would not get bombed, or the things that were just recently erected suddenly getting bombed in the bombing montage that eats up what feels like 10 years of my life.
Like the line about Christo's latest installation.
Yes.
Which, man, that's not lowbrow, dude.
No.
But at the same time, and followed, I think, shortly after by like the line like, "Oh no, I dropped my thermos of napalm." These are some of the strongest sketches out of the Mike era that I think you get. Most, like, I think Kevin Murphy's, however possibly indulgent it was, the Academy chorus was beautiful, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But Crow, especially, like Trace was really on for this episode, because Crow doesn't really get to do much more than get frustrated, but his frustration is so amazing. I just love when, like, Tom is quietly needling him about the internet not working, and he's like, Tom just reads out what's on the screen, and then Crow just says, "I can read, don't you think I can read?"
Yeah, that's one of the things that's great, and you really enjoy towards his last few years on the show, is that Trace's Crow gets increasingly manic and almost downright Looney Tunes-like in his last few seasons, and that's really on display here.
So I would say this is definitely a top 10 for me, and even if it's not the funniest, it shows what is so magical about MST3K, because they can take an absolute non-movie and make it must-see TV. Another interesting point about the Starfighters is they get a lot bluer than they usually do. This is a real departure from the Joel era. I don't think Joel would ever make so many sex jokes, however buried in entendre they are.
Yeah, it gets to the point where at the very end of the episode, they run through all of the jokes. That's another, I think, inventive bit in which they have to talk about how they've done jokes about threesomes, they've done jokes about premature ejaculation, done jokes about impotence, and it's like we've done everything. Like at the end, they're just exasperated. Yeah,
yeah. It's hard to think. I can't think of any other movie that's quite so forward about sex jokes.
And it might have to do with what you were talking about earlier. It's like, there is nothing here. What can you do? Because even the movie, it's strange. There are love interests in the movie, but this is an extremely sexless and dour film.
Really? I think the very opposite. I think
really
there's no chemistry between the human beings, but between the humans and their machines, it is totally erotic.
Oh, there are some great hand close-ups of hands fondling bits of jet.
And I think maybe that's why they're picking up on it so strongly, is this is just a very erotic movie about machines.
So do you think the movie could potentially be a huge success if it was released overseas as Emmanuelle in Flight?
Or what's that documentary about people who have sex with things?
Beth, we all have sex with things. They're called people. Even though they're just lowly things.
There's a documentary called Married to the Eiffel Tower about people's erotic fixations on inanimate objects of various sorts. Like the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah. That's, I don't want to yuck another person's yum, but that's weird. I mean, I suppose it's kind of like a big dong.
Speaking of big dongs, Bob Dornan's in this movie.
Yes, and he is a colossal dong. Did you know much about Bob Dornan before watching this episode, or was this kind of like your gateway to Dornan? Because, like, as a Canadian getting American politics filtered through Canadian news, like, Dornan didn't reach me the same way that most of the heavy-hitting politicians did. You know, like, as a kid growing up, I knew who Bill Clinton and Bob Dole were, but Bob Dornan didn't matter.
I don't think he was ever a big enough deal. Like, he was in the Senate. No, he was a congressman.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just kind of flew under the radar. Like, I knew people
flew under the radar, eh? In Starfighters?
I mean, he seems very much in the Rush Limbaugh kind of Roy Cohn mold, like just people who know what's good for everybody and everyone needs to shut up and do what they say. He was notoriously anti-gay and kind of a misogynist, although apparently he was, according to Wiki at least, he supported the civil rights movement.
How much, we don't know. You know, I mean, he may have done that, but I remember, like, just in looking up Dornan just now, I recall seeing an article about his attempt to get a seat in the House.
Mm-hmm.
And his opponent was a Hispanic Democrat, but he tried to spread a smear campaign saying that she was, quote, a fake Hispanic, whatever that means.
Yep.
Not a great guy.
What's interesting about that is I read that when he lost, he demanded a recount because he assumed that there was a whole bunch of fake votes, fake Hispanic votes propping her up. And it turned out he was right. They actually found about 200 I guess, fake votes of some kind, but they weren't enough to actually change her lead. So it didn't end up being
lost?
anything. Yeah. So, but it's interesting because this is before he started his political career in earnest, and he seems to have a couple movies under his belt. His mother was in vaudeville, so that's how he came to acting. But it seems to be he mostly did military roles. And, you know, had a middling career before he went into politics. So in a lot of ways, Bob Dornan's career, both as an actor and a politician, seems to be kind of a lower rung equivalent of Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, because I remember, you know, in getting a taste of what Dornan is like politically, like very early on when they spot his name in the credits, they comment that, like, Robert Dornan, the congressman, was Rush Limbaugh not available?
Yeah.
So, as we have talked about a little bit, Bob Dornan was notorious for being sexist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic, and usually a little bit unhinged, and essentially his worst remarks and moments were compiled into a 120-page book by Nathan Callahan and William Payton, and it was published, I won't say the full title, but it was published as Shut Up, and then followed by a gay slur. And that quotation that gives the book its title was actually shouted by Dornan's wife Sally at an AIDS activist during an Orange County town forum. Dornan claimed, however, that this was a conspiracy and that the book was backed by director Oliver Stone, whom Dornan labeled a Bolshevik enemy.
Yeah, man.
Woof.
But you can. I mean, I think we can say, as bad as Dornan is, it sounds like his wife is even more of a piece of work. Shouting down a slur at an AIDS activist? My God. Anyway.
They were made for each other, let's put it that way. Like those two diaper monsters in Dan Aykroyd's Nothing But Trouble, which is how I pictured them.
So I actually have a quote from the Amazing Colossal Episode Guide, and not surprisingly, this was by Kevin Murphy, who seems to be the most ready to use his platform to take down jerks. So here we go. Bob Dornan, the very super ultra conservative congressman from California who hates everybody and everything, and announced his presidential bid in 1995. Bob, known as B1 Bob for his undying support for that multi-million-dollar dark and beautiful angel of death, enjoys a reputation for combining the political skills of Senator Joe McCarthy, Benito Mussolini, and Satan. Tune into C-SPAN whenever there's legislation that affects such vague categories as family values or homosexuality. He'll get his turn to speak, and I think you'll enjoy the pungent scent of brimstone in the air, and you just might pick out the whispery ghost of Roy Cohn.
Yeah, I loved reading up about Dornan for this episode. I saw that in the Washington Post, he was described as, and I quote, the enfant terrible of the House Republican caucus. Not a good guy.
Still alive if you want to look him up.
For now.
So it's interesting that Bob Dornan's nickname, B-1 Bob, comes out of his ardent support for a bomber, because in this particular movie, his father wants him to be a bomber pilot, but he wants to be a starfighter.
You say it like that and you make the movie sound real exciting.
So I would actually say the star of this movie is the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, which everyone salivates over throughout the movie.
Oh yeah, they act like this is essentially, whenever a scientist in a movie creates a beautiful woman, that's how they're reacting to it here. To the jet here. They're basically acting like Anthony Michael Hall, that other guy in Weird Science, when they make Kelly LeBrock.
Oh, creepy, but not off base in this comparison.
No.
To put it into context, when you look at it now, it just looks like a kind of typical jet, like a, kind of shaped like a missile with triangles stuck out of it, But this was a very new look in the 50s when it was first created. That really kind of lawn dartish look was not something that planes looked like before, so people were really excited about the Starfighter and what it could do. It was also, it could go twice the speed of sound. They hadn't really been able to do that before. Like, there's a lot of gee whiz here about this particular plane that is somewhat earned because it was so exciting and new.
However, there's a huge point which gets debated in the movie but never really fully resolved, which is that the Starfighter is dangerous and that, people will quite easily crash with it. And because there's the senator's father, the father of Bob Dornan's character, who is a senator, keeps calling. Who
has, I gotta say, he has a Trump anus mouth, and I could not stop staring at it.
Everyone's a little bit lumpy and un-Hollywood in this. Let's just say that, including Dornan. But yes, he has a repulsive mouth. And a delightful meowth.
But you were saying, and I think I agree, that this movie, as much as it is in love with this plane, does not seem to be entirely sure that it is not extremely dangerous plane.
It's never clear what real side the movie is on, and it's hard to say if that was something that they were intentionally trying to address a criticism, or if they were trying to dissuade. I honestly don't know what side the movie is on. I could not tell you, despite the loving shots of the planes. I'm not sure if it's for or against Starfighters, despite the fact that they are the title characters of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, and my take on it is it's very much trying to support that, gee whiz, isn't this amazing what we've created? America is so great. But they can't help kind of subtly acknowledging that this was actually a very dangerous and very hard to fly piece of machinery. I've been reading a bit about it, and I found a great article from BBC that kind of gives a history of this plane. It almost killed Chuck Yeager, who, of course, is the test pilot who first broke the speed of sound. Because let me see if I can find the story about it.
It turns out they put all the gasoline outside of the plane, which was the first big mistake.
Okay. And this is just a quote from the article. Even at the high altitudes for which it was designed, the F-104 could be a handful. One very nearly claimed a very high-profile victim, Chuck Yeager, the first pilot to fly, flew a specialized version of the F-104 during his time at the Aerospace Research Pilot School in the 1960s. These 3 Starfighters had a rocket motor fitted so the aircraft could be flown to incredibly high altitudes. Once there, the air was so thin that the short, stubby wings couldn't generate enough lift to keep it aloft. It was the nearest anyone could get on Earth to the conditions astronauts would be controlling their spaceship beyond the atmosphere. So he did this. He climbed up to 100,000 feet, and then he prepared to use rocket thrusters but they pushed the aircraft into a flat spin. He stayed inside the spinning jet, hoping he'd be able to regain control. He did not, because it's very, very hard to gain control of a starfighter once you lose it, apparently. So he launched his ejector seat, but as the parachute opened, his helmet visor was struck by the bottom of the seat. Molten propellant from the seat's rocket motor, they had it in the seat, burned through the visor, turning to flame as it reached the oxygen in Yeager's pressure suit.
Oh my god, that sounds terrifying.
The test pilot only put out the flame inside his suit by removing a glove and fanning the flames with his bare hand.
Ooh.
Yeager floated to the ground, his face and half his hair burned out, and an eye socket cut from the collision with his chair.
Oh my god.
So yeah, there you go.
Now compare that with the copy that was on the posters and lobby cards for the Starfighters. The blazing adventure of the men in planes who rocket to the very edge of outer space. Blazing indeed.
They gave a bunch of these birds to the West Germans. Luftwaffe? Yes, they still had a Luftwaffe, huh? And again, I'm going to quote this because this is marvelous. Out of 1,000 F-104s it bought, nearly 300 were lost in accidents. German pilots dubbed the Starfighter the Widowmaker or Lawn Dart. One widely known joke went, "How do you get your hands on a Starfighter? Buy a field and wait."
And here I was thinking that the only German joke was two peanuts were walking down the Strasse and one of them was a salted peanut. Hey, let's not talk about Germany. Let's instead talk about Canada. I have a Canadian fact here.
Okay.
Yes, from our Department of Canada's. And according to a book called Canada's Air Forces on Exchange, one of the first test pilots for the 104 was Jack Woodman, a Canadian, and he tested 38 F-104 flights with two different starfighters.
Mm-hmm.
And they're now on display as one craft at Edwards AFB in California because they both crashed in the 70s.
Okay.
So
it's starting to see like Bob Dornan's father in the movie might have had a point trying to get him out of these starfighters.
Yeah, it turns out old Anus Mouth's the hero. The question on everyone's lips, Beth. What the hell is this movie?
Yeah, so maybe the best way to start this is to take a little bit out of a very special part of the Amazing Colossal episode guide called TV's Frank's Picks. So here he talks a little bit about the movie from his perspective, as he was often the one who chose them. And he points out that everyone else hated this movie and were very angry with him for choosing it.
So why on earth would Frank do such a devious thing?
He says, "So why did we do it? Were we desperate? Well, yes, we needed films. Most of the films I recommended were turned down because they were even worse than Starfighters.
What?
Personally, I enjoyed the tonality of Starfighters and I wanted to do it. I agree. It has a great tone. It's very boozy and sunny."
I don't know. I felt like I was watching a film exclusively made out of B-roll.
I said, "Sometimes during the writing of an episode, we would get sidetracked with debates and arguments about the film itself. Most of the writers thought Starfighters was a film that was made only to be shown on Air Force bases. After all, who else would it appeal to? But I maintain that they don't make these kinds of films for just the armed services. After all, it wasn't a training film. It was an action and romance film. Yes, there was no action, and the romance involving, as it did, Bob Dornan making out was gross, but still, I felt the director was going for a kind of Howard Hawks professional man in action, only angels have wings motif."
Huh.
So that's his take on it. Mike disagrees. He's been on record that he thinks that those only meant to be shown on Air Force bases.
Yeah, I can see this. Of course, it makes sense that you would come away with that impression, because let me tell you about a man named Will Zenz who directed the picture.
Okay.
So Zenz, who was born in Milwaukee, ended up serving in the Air Force. Surprise! Yeah, he joined when World War II broke out. And as he describes it in an interview I found, there'll be a link in the show notes for the Ventura County Star, he said he was lucky because even though he was stationed in England, France, Belgium, Germany, he never saw, quote, action. So he was totally fine. And when he started his own production company, which was called Riviera Productions, this was in the early 60s, Starfighters might be the first to come out of Riviera Productions. So this was his big break, writing everything he knew. So this was like, in many ways, a personal film. This is his love letter to his time in the Air Force.
Right.
And believe it or not, he made more than this movie. He made more than one, which is shocking to me. Making Starfighters should make you, like, it should be a crime to be within 24 feet of a camera. But sure enough, he made several films, amongst them Trucker's Woman, From Nashville with Music, To the Shores of Hell, White Line Fever, and lastly, one title I'll bring up, Hot Summer in Barefoot County, which was screened as part of Quentin Tarantino's 50-film Los Angeles Grindhouse Festival in 2007.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So he has at least one fan. And sure enough, he's posing in front of various posters in the picture in the Ventura County Star article. Nowhere to be seen is the Starfighters.
Maybe he's more enamored of his later movies.
Yeah, it might be. Among the actors he worked for, among the actors who worked on his movies, Johnny Cash apparently is in one of his films. I'm going to go on a limb and say From Nashville with Music, though he might be the titular Trucker's Woman.
Okay, so this is more sounding like this was like a personal, maybe a vanity project or something that was very personal to him. Another person on Reddit suggested this is kind of a subgenre that used to exist more between the 1930s and 1960s called service films. They aren't really war movies, just movies set around military bases or on Navy ships with military people as characters. And then our ever-resourceful producer Chris ended up finding another source that kind of explains this service film a little bit more, and it does sound like this is much more in that role, at least. Service training films usually used a Bildungsroman structure with a naive, troubled, or brash young man coming of age, usually under the guidance of a paternal sergeant or officer. Romantic subplots were often interwoven with the service story. That's basically this movie.
Now, I found a curious comment on Reddit that just says this. Boy, that lead guy sure was handsome. I wish he was president of the United States, and someday perhaps he will. This is credited to one Dob Bornan.
I think that this was meant for a wide release, mainly because this formula is Top Gun, but Top Gun did it better.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's the Shallow 13, where we bombard your ears with 13 fun-sized facts about both the movie and this episode of MST3K. Adam, put on your poopy suit and go, go, go.
Starfighters was one of 4 episodes released on the final DVD set by Rhino Home Video. That'd be Mystery Science Theater 3000 Volume 12, before the rights to MST3K switched over to Shout Factory for all future releases.
Though not officially proclaimed as such, Dr. F and Frank's cranial ports and Mike's bold barbecue sauce marks the final invention exchange of the series until Season 11. It was the only invention exchange of Season 6.
In the tech support sketches, the pre-recorded hold time voices are provided by Kevin Murphy and Jim Mallon, while the real person Crow gets to connect with is series writer and occasional pitch impersonator Paul Chaplin.
The hold music that bedevils Crow in the first couple segments is similar to the ubiquitous hold music that was used on 65 million Cisco phone systems in the 90s and 2000s. This American Life has an interesting segment on one man's quest to track down the music's composer, and we'll have a link in our show notes.
Upon seeing the title The Starfighters, Crow dubs it The Sean Penn Story.
The Sean Penn Story!
Though our youngest listeners know Penn best from his debut novel, notorious for its mangling of the English language and laughable sex scenes, Crow's referring to the actor's tendency in the past to beat up both the press and whoever he happened to be dating at the time, because Sean Penn is garbage.
When the film cuts back to air traffic control, Mike comments,
Reagan fired us, gotta go.
George.
This is a reference to the 11,000 striking air traffic controllers who were fired by President Ronald Reagan for refusing his order to return to work, and also issued a lifetime ban on rehiring strikers. Reagan's legacy has crippled workers' efforts to unionize and bargain collectively in America, which has dramatically changed the nation's economic climate and arguably led to a decades-long stagnation of incomes. Fun stuff.
One notable riff is
Name's Geen.
in reference to a dairy farmer. Troubled farm boy Ed Gein, aka the Plainsfield Butcher, was a grave robber and murderer who made clothes and masks from his victims' skin. Gein was the inspiration for just about every movie serial killer, including Ezra Cobb, played by Roberts Blossom in Deranged, Psycho's Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Leatherface, played by Gunnar Hansen, and Ed Gein's Ed Gein, played by Steve Railsback. Who knew it'd take so many faces to play Ed Gein?
On a less grisly but still mean note, Tom compares one of the pilot's dates to Frankenhooker.
Frankenhooker!
Frankenhooker was the last of Frank Henenlotter's classic run of horror comedies and was in high demand in video stores in the 90s. Partly that's due to Bill Murray quipping to press, "If you see one movie this year, make sure it's Frankenhooker." Mostly it's because no one could resist playing with the film's novelty VHS box. The VHS art depicted the title monster staring at prospective renters, which, when touched in just the right place, would bark the monster's catchphrase. Want a date?
Yes, people who look like other people really are the luckiest people in the world. In reference to Bill, Crow asks, "Do I really look like George Goober Lindsay?" The putty-faced George Lindsay earned his claim to fame as whoopee-cap-sporting Goober Pyle, cousin of Gomer on The Andy Griffith Show. Typecast after years of work on Griffith and its spin-offs, Lindsay, like MST3K alum Adam West, earned acclaim for a late career appearance as himself for a courtroom scene on cult comedy News Radio. On News Radio, George Goober Lindsay was called in to testify that a skull in a collection of props is not his own skull.
Notice how often the pilots say cordite?
Cordite for... Why did we pick cordite?
The cordite call sign given to the pilots refers to a substitute for gunpowder and is used as a military propellant in guns and rockets.
Although Mike and the bots rag on them, coaxial rotors, double-bladed helicopters, are considered to be much safer than single-rotor helicopters, mostly because they balance out the asymmetries and vibration issues of the latter. Plus, they can carry more. Their disadvantage? Well, sometimes the blade collide.
The infamous poopy suit, yes, that's actually what it's called, seems to have had two different meanings in the armed forces. One version is shown in this movie, the name for an anti-exposure suit designed to keep pilots relatively warm and dry while they wait for rescue in the cold Atlantic water if they have to eject for an emergency. Alternatively, poopy suit is the name for the standard blue cotton coveralls worn by officers in the Navy while at sea. The poopy apparently comes from what happens if you don't get your coveralls off in time.
Fred O'Brien tells Lieutenant Bill York, "I'll supply the Dexedrine." This is a real Air Force tactic, supplying amphetamines or go pills like Dexedrine to pilots. Dexedrine, or Dexies, keep you going, hence Dexy's Midnight Runners. The controversy surrounding the Air Force providing low doses of the drug to pilots reached a fever pitch when 2 American pilots on Dexies bombed 4 Canadian soldiers in 2002. We'll have a link to a Guardian article on this incident in our show notes.
And that's time.
Ending on such a bleak
I
note.
was just going to say.
That's time! 4 dead.
My husband, who loves me very much, told me
Killed 4
that
Canadians.
he's never met someone as ill-suited for the military as me.
That's, I mean, depending on what you mean by that, that can be a compliment.
He thinks I would have cried a lot.
Oh, I thought he was saying that your will couldn't be broken.
No, he thinks that I'm an independent thinker, so it would be hard to move into groupthink, but I would still cry a lot. They would just ask me to leave.
So you would just get the kind of like mildest form of honorable discharge, which is just, get out of here, you crazy kid.
Yeah, I think he's right. There's things about the military that might be interesting for me to learn, but the day-to-day grind, my body is made out of gum and baling twine. I wouldn't be able to stand up.
Plus, you're so easily frightened that with you, every suit becomes a poopy suit.
I'll have you know I'm very good at holding myself in.
You heard it here first. Beth, least likely to shit herself.
So it's time for The Scorner, our semi-regular segment about the movie score. All right, Adam, I'm really looking forward to this, not only because I love this segment and I'm glad that it's had its return, but also the music in this movie is amazing,
Yes.
and I want to know more about it.
Well, the music, it's like, well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is, I mean, this score is great. And the bad news is there's very little on Stephen Paul, the composer of this score, and there's very little on this music because this film hasn't even been released on DVD yet. The closest thing it's had to a DVD release is the MST3K episode. That's on DVD. This movie is not. The closest thing I've come to having any kind of recordings for the score is just ripping stuff from a VHS copy. Like there's no sign of it. But this is what we know about Stephen Paul. Stephen Paul has composed music to 2 other movies. He has a grand total of 3 credits. And this is coming from the IMDb, which is not always the most reliable source. But we see 2 other 90s credits. One is for composing 2 songs, Candy Corner and Rolling Motion, for a film called Carpool in 1996.
Whoa, that's recent.
Yeah, recent enough. More recent than the Starfighters. And his last credit, it has nothing to do with vehicles. We've gone from planes to cars. Beth, what's the most logical third thing that he should score after doing both planes and cars?
Trains?
No, dinosaurs. His last credit, his last composer credit, is for writing the song Pick 'em Up for Barney's Great Adventure. That's right. Barney the dinosaur had a movie.
Wow. See, I always assumed that none of this was originally composed. It was just a collection of like, what it, you know, the word, like studio ownership.
House music or stock music. Yeah.
That's what I assumed, because it's all kind of related thematically, but it all sounds like it's different performers and whatnot.
Yeah, and it was not uncommon to do that at the time. Like, I know that, for instance, some big composers of the time, when they were young and cutting their teeth, would record essentially for a whole library of music. So they would just record music for, say, a studio. Like, I guess the best example of this that I have in my own soundtrack collection is Bernard Herrmann, the great composer who was best known as Alfred Hitchcock's composer. He scored essentially a number of radio and television shows for CBS. So he recorded archive music, like music that could be used for anything, that was primarily used for radio, but it ended up being used in some episodes of The Twilight Zone, which Herrmann also scored towards, I guess, the last bit of his TV career before segueing into films and becoming a more successful composer. And this was luckily released on the first and I think only box set of Twilight Zone music as the Outer Space Suite, because primarily Herrmann's music was used in sci-fi programs. But yeah, this appears to be original scoring for this movie. Like, Stephen Paul saw that there was something very loving about these shots of jets and followed accordingly. But what's also making it hard to find information on him is that, one, the Starfighters, despite Will Zenz's optimism about his career, doesn't seem to have inspired anybody except MST3K fans. They're the only ones who remember this movie. And secondly, there's another Stephen Paul out there who is a young country musician, and to my knowledge, there's no relation. And
so that's burying the online searches.
Yeah, if there was anything that we could find, it's getting overtaken by, hey, there's this other Stephen Paul, and that's who you really mean, right? No, Google, for the last time, no.
I did appreciate, because I actually think it's good music. Like, I would enjoy. I think, like you, we were both trying to find like a clean cut of the ba 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 music. I wanted to make it for my ringtone. I think that would be amazing, but I just couldn't find a clear enough cut for it. But in trying to track this down, I found some interesting side notes. Mike in the Box mentioned Nelson Riddle, who has a kind of similar aesthetic. I'd recommend people check him out.
Oh, yes, because Nelson Riddle scored the 1966 Batman series.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Nice. And there's also, they make a quip about The Association, a 60s band that is best known for the song Cherish. And they have a song named Windy that has a very Starfighter-esque elements to it with the male chorus. And I enjoyed it a lot. I'm glad I found a way to track it down.
Yeah, Windy is great. But I want to send this out to anybody who's out there. If you or someone you love knows where the recordings are for the Starfighters music, send them to us. Send them to the hollowed out volcano where Megaphonic lives, because we want these. We desperately want these released. If Puma Man's soundtrack can be released, this can be released and find some kind of audience. There should be no film soundtrack too niche to not to release the music. Like, please, 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 we got to get this out there. This is great.
I second that. This is amazing and should not be hidden from view anymore.
Yeah. The world demands Starfighters music.
Well, speaking of men's choral work, what did you think of the Tom Servo Academy song?
Well, I think that it's funny. I didn't know this episode, but there were several sound clips that were included in the Windows 95 desktop theme that I had. One was Get Me on the Information Superhighway / Crow Freakout. And the Servo men's chorus was used for something or other. It may have been emptying the trash bin.
Really?
Yeah. Not all of it, obviously, but like I remember that first line at the very least. Here's to the guys and gals who like to fly. And so, yeah, I enjoyed the sketch. I mean, this might sound a bit uncharitable, Beth, but I think it's true. Kevin Murphy's the only cast member who can sing of the old series.
It's funny because Mike is a good composer,
Yes.
but I wouldn't say he's got a strong voice.
No. And Joel covered up his very thin voice when they redid the theme song for the Comedy Central years, and he gave it this wonderful Devo production, which makes him sound like a much better singer than he is. But otherwise, no. They're all pretty tin-eared.
He has a beautiful voice, actually.
Yeah.
And he seems like a man of many hats because he has this voice. He's a writer. He basically was a construction guy when they were first building the set. Like, he seems to be able to do a lot of things.
Yeah, and he was the camera operator during the old KTMA days.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course, I think everybody put their blood, sweat, and tears into the sets. Like, I know that Trace did a lot of work on the sets themselves.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I've only ever seen footage of Kevin hammering away on stuff, so for some reason I just imagined him being the lead guy on that. But anyway, yes, his voice. There is a clip where he lent his voice to a song on the internet. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes. I believe that's from an ex-KCD comic in which he is diagnosing a unlucky patient with the many diseases he has, and he does it in the form of song.
It's very good. We will link it in the show notes.
And another thing that's kind of interesting about this song is that 90% or more of the lyrics are recycled from other songs.
Right. I mentioned Up, Up, and Away by Fifth Dimension, but it's kind of a melange.
Yes, because Skyrockets in Flight Afternoon Delight from Afternoon Delight, that's heard. Would You Like to Fly in My Beautiful Balloon, which is from...
I think that's the Up, Up, and Away.
Yes, that's Up, Up, and Away. What was I thinking? Of course. Yeah. In a Big Country, Dreams Sail With You from the band Big Country song. You guessed it, Big Country. And I didn't know that because some of these are fairly obscure. Like, We Are Kids from Saving Earth. I did not know what that was from.
Yeah. Did you find it?
Well, there's a link. Luckily, Kids for Saving Earth is a charity. So that was associated with them for kind of like TV and radio spots. So that makes sense. And fortunately, there is a rundown on the MST3K wiki for this sketch, which has all of the relevant lyrics underlined because someone, I think, prior to the MST3K wiki, I think probably in the Usenet days of MST3K, tracked down every single reference that's there in this sketch.
Nice work, early interneter.
Yes. Thanks, Dork. Wow, Chris. We have been given no less than 40 different Lockheed Starfighters, and we've crashed all of them in the span of less than an hour. Surely, there is something more that you can offer us that is perhaps a bit more stable.
Well, I just have a question for you guys.
Yes?
Do you like your food bold?
You know what? I prefer it mild.
Beth, what about you? Are you bold enough to be bold?
Hell yeah. Bring it on.
What's the boldest food you've ever had?
Just really strong Indian food, I guess. When you don't have to tell them like, no, not white people hot. Give me the actual hot. And then it's really hot. And then I just remember this one time I got stuff that's so hot that I took a couple bites, and then just the rest of the night I was just drinking water and milk. It was really unpleasant.
Oh, man. Well, they have a thing called white people hot. It's called butter chicken. That's the thing they invented for tourists.
And it's very tasty, but it's not very spicy.
Yes.
But do you think that bold and spicy are the same thing?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because bold refers to a bite, but spice is its own thing.
Well, I would say I'm more spicy than bold.
Yes, I am quite spicy, but bold,
I am not a big fan of barbecue sauce, if that answers that question.
So I think of bold as maybe being, tangy, but also spicy, but also, I don't know, slapping your face around from the inside.
I always associate bold as being like a mixture of sweet and spicy, I think because of the association with barbecue sauces.
Yeah. I mean, would mesquite be bold? Because I cannot handle mesquite.
Although she is my favorite X-Man. Certainly the boldest. She's always nude.
I think it's just what it's not that I can't handle it, but I feel like I'm being disrespected by it. Is that what bold means?
I'm a woman. How dare you? So do you have like barbecue sauce, Beth, and turn to your burger and say, ooh, fresh?
A little. I don't tend to slather on barbecue sauce because you have to do so much work to get past the tang.
Well, this is the other question for barbecue sauce. Do you use it as a dipping sauce or topping for a sandwich and the like, or do you cook with it?
I'd rather cook with it.
Yeah, same here.
But if I'm honest, my favorite condiment is mayonnaise.
I think we can declare both of you not bold at all.
Fair enough.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you've ever crashed in a Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. And thanks again to all our Patreon supporters. Support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits from this episode and many of our older episodes by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/27.
All right. Well, we've managed to run with our Starfighters without cutting ourselves. What are we going to be doing next?
Well, I have gone into the wreckage of the plane. I have cut open the charred poopy suit, and I have read the signs written within. And they suggest that we will all be flinging a bit of poop next time as we look at Season 3, Episode 6, Time of the Apes.
Yay!
I hate ape movies.
Oh man, but these are among MST3K's highlights. So, Beth, while you may turn to an ape and say, I don't care, I think you'll be saying the opposite to this episode.
Is there a Kenny in this one?
Yes! Technically, his name is Johnny. Johnny doesn't care. But he is a Kenny. And he's very irritating.
Does he have tiny pants?
Yes.
Okay.
And he's very poorly dubbed. I can't remember if he actually has tiny pants or not. It's been a while since I've seen the episode, but I remember loving it. This is a very good episode, as I recall.
Let's put down our bets. Tiny pants?
Yes. Only you, the listener, can decide. Will Kenny be wearing tiny pants in our next movie? Dial our 1-900 number and vote.
I seem to also recall this was one of those legendary, was supposed to be a series but never got picked up pilots.
Oh,
movies.
Incorrect. It was a series, and it was edited into a movie, all 26 episodes of it.
Oh, God.
So it's going to be really incoherent, actually.
Well, let's start getting ourselves ready for that.
Yep, let's all start throwing our bones towards the monolith that is 2 weeks from now.
All right. Well, on that note, until next time.
Bye.
Keep boozing at the military.
And may your face be puffy and weird.
It will be. All right. Take it away, Theme Squad.
speaking of big dongs,